Greetings. Welcome to the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track. And today I am joined by longtime supporter of the track and my friend, Delilah S. Dawson. Hi, Delilah.
Hi, Carol.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, especially since we're here today to talk about this wonderful book, Violence.
Yay.
And I wanted to show people I love my little scabbard.
Yeah, those are good bookmarks. If you come see me in person, you get a knife.
There you go. That's a good
knife, but a knife.
Right. A paper one. That's what we need to make that clear, right?
That's all they trust me with.
Yeah. I guess they don't do much good if you actually need a knife, but they're great for bookmarks.
Bookmarks and paper cuts.
Yeah, well, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Now, you know what? Now that you say that, I'll probably do that to myself at some point. But in any case, and I really appreciate you doing this, especially since you were very kind to indulge me. I think it was about a week or so after the book actually came out last year. And it's been a little over a year now. But I wanted to talk about the book so badly that I actually somehow managed to cajole you into doing one of these. Well, we talked about some other things that you had come out with as well. But I was like, okay, well, I don't know anybody else who's read it yet, so I've got to talk about this book, So how about Delilah? Okay.
I do know a good bit about it.
Yeah, I think you do. Yes, you're the expert. So I do. I have some questions for you that now a couple of them for anyone who has seen the earlier interview or our discussion of the book. There are a couple of them that I pulled from there just because I thought, well, there might be a lot of people who didn't watch it then because they hadn't read the book yet, and some things that I thought were particularly insightful that we discussed about the book that might be useful for people. So so you may remember a couple of these, but
oh no, I don't remember anything. All random. Nothing.
But now my first question, and we are talking about the Violence, this wonderful book. Now, if people ask you, and I'm sure they do, what genre this book is, what do you tell them?
Whatever shelf you found it on is the shelf it lives on. I don't know. I have this problem where I write books and trust my agents and editors to find the right shelf for it, and sometimes there isn't a great one. The Violence is currently up for an International Thriller Writers Award as a thriller, and then it was it was a finalist for the Goodreads Choice Award in horror.
Right.
So it's kind of a horror thriller, new dystopian women's fiction crime. I don't even know. It's got there's pro wrestling in it, along with domestic violence and a pandemic. So I don't know. It's speculative fiction.
Right. There you go. That covers a lot. I agree.
The big basket.
So yeah, if people ask, that's a good way of just encompassing all of those areas.
I made it up.
Yeah. Now, it strikes me, especially upon reading it a second time, because the first time, frankly, I had difficulty putting it down for any amount of time. But in reading it the second time, it struck me about the fact that this was a bit of a departure for you at the time. And not that your other books haven't had some of those elements that are in here, but it was a departure for you and what, add the book as a whole. And what I'm wondering is, was that something that you set out specifically to do? I mean, did you plan it that way, or did it just kind of organically occur that this is what you were going to write and that's how it came out?
I don't really have any control over the book ideas. They kind of happen. And, this one, much like Wake of Vultures, it was kind of one of those, oh, you probably can't sell this. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to write it anyway. So let's just see what happens. I got the idea before COVID, and the book sold before COVID. So I was writing it during COVID. So it was definitely very fortunate in that realm. But yeah, I don't
Just
know. It's I guess this is my most serious book to date. I say everything I write is kind of on this spectrum between whimsical and dark. It's somewhere in there, and this is probably my most normal. The only really speculative element is the violence, which is the plague of random violence, where it's kind of like malaria, in that if it's inside you, you kind of get it, and you blank out, kill somebody, and if like just brutally without anything, there's just nothing there, and then you kind of wake up and go on about your life. Outside of that, it's mostly actual real human terrible issues. So it is my most serious, least whimsical book. But the darkness is definitely there, and I think it's still reads very much like a Delilah Dawson book. It's just there's no sexy vampires, talking donkeys, puns, none of that.
right. It's hard to incorporate a lot of humor, although you get to do that a little bit once once Chelsea is with the VFR.
Well, there's a lot
Because
of what you call on the urban fantasy track whistling through the graveyard, where you kind of have to balance out the horror of it with a little jab of humor every here and there. But it's definitely not a humor book.
yeah, if people are looking for a laugh riot, this is not the book for them, right? Now, and we talked about this. This is one of the things that we discussed before, was that for me, one of the hallmarks of this book that and is as impressive as the characters and the plot is the way that you employ suspense in the book. And one of the things that I had asked you about before was that did you feel as do you think that doing the alternating points of view kind of aided in that process?
Oh,
That
definitely.
the three, yeah.
I definitely use that as much as I can. I mean, most of my books I like to kind of end the chapters on either a cliffhanger or an uncomfortable question. Like I never want a chapter end, you go, oh, thank God, everybody's fine. I can put this book down and it'll be fine. Like I don't want you to do that. I want you to feel nervous enough to keep reading. But in this one, I would end that way, and then I would kind of get to be like, okay, now you can marinate in that while we go terrorize another woman.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it was very fun. I write front to back very fast. This book especially did not have a really in-depth outline. Like it had an outline, but it was kind of like, these things happen, and then there was a chunk of the outline that was like, and then there's a journey, and then like the ending. So I had a lot of
Right.
places to discover it. So it really helped as I was writing, to end at a moment and then think, okay, which of the other two characters, needs to go next, to try to kind of make each cliffhanger last as long as I could.
Yes, well, it worked. Let me tell you, it worked. And even upon a second read of the book just recently, I thought, even though I know what's going to happen, because it wasn't, I read it when it first came out or right before it first came out. And so I knew what, in general, what was going to happen. That didn't seem to matter. I mean, it kept making me, want to keep turning those pages. So, however you did it, your plan worked. Now, one of the other things that you also mentioned before was that you had initially, had the idea that you might have the story being told from several different perspectives, and that your editor asked you, or had the idea to use the three that you did, except for that one little David chapter that was a surprise, and that showed up at the perfect time, actually. But if there had been one other character that you could have added their perspective in, who do you think you would have picked?
I mean, it's so difficult. When I started writing this project, I sold it on spec. So I wrote 20,000 words in an outline, and that's what we took to editors. And yeah, originally there were like many points of view. I mean, I was like 11 or something, where, and outside of the main three women, Brooklyn was a point of view, David was a point of view, River was a point of view, Leanne was a point of view. There was an incel blogger that was a point of view. There was like a Florida governor. It was a lot I guess I'd read Chuck Wendig's Wanderers recently and was like, oh yeah, let's do this big cast. And they cut it way down to where we only get that one David chapter. I had 3 David chapters that I wanted in the whole book. And she was like, nope, you get one. So yeah, I mean, I like, I think Leanne would have had a really interesting journey to
Mm.
show. The original idea was that she lived with her boyfriend, and she found like she got something bit her, and she found bed bugs, and she knew he worked in like a bed bug lab, and that like that's how the virus got out, was it was a bed bug lab, and that was how they spread. And then I was like, there's too many caste implications around bed bugs and
Right.
cleanliness and racism, and like I don't want this to be a book about that. I want it to be about, you know, a very particular kind of violence that's, you know, a kind of upper middle class quiet violence that you don't see as much, and that I feel is very much in my wheelhouse as compared to the bed bug curse is a whole different wheelhouse than
Right.
what I have. So yeah, probably Leanne. I would have liked to have kind of followed her as she, you know, broke out of where she started.
Right. And she was a great character. So I think that that would have been that would have been a fun one to follow. Now, can you can you tell us a little bit about the disease itself? Now, what I liked in the book was the fact that it was, you know, you had the reveals of little bits of things that they found out about it, which was very much the way things have worked out with COVID. Is that, you know, in real life, when, you know, we found out, oh well, this is what, you know, it's less likely to be transferred this way, but it's, you
Yeah.
know, it's more likely. So you did that too. You know, you did a little bit at a time. But what can you tell us about the disease itself, and kind of, I guess, what your idea? I mean, what your ideas were behind that?
So the first idea I had, which was at Seattle Comic Con, Emerald City Comic Con, and I guess that would have been 2019, um, was I had been on a panel and something had come up around domestic violence or violence against women or something. And I remember coming on a panel kind of emotional and being like, you know, it's so unfair. It's just women can't really fight back. We're smaller, we're not as strong. The laws in many states work against us. That even if someone abuses you for years, if you kill them, you're going to jail anyway, which is, I think lots of people, you know, have an issue with that. I grew up in a household with domestic violence that is, you know, that's what this book is modeled on, is what I grew up in. Um, and it's a very quiet kind of violence. Choking or strangling someone, if you know what you're doing, there are no bruises. There's no way to prove it ever happened. And so it's a lot
Mhm.
different from being, you know, slapped or hit or pushed downstairs because there's no evidence. So I had this thought, you know, in my room at the hotel at the con, was just, what if there was some way where you just had a little bit of time where you could get away with anything, where you could claim it wasn't your fault, where there wasn't, you know, any way to prove what had happened, because that's the whole point of this kind of masculine violence, is you can't prove it happened. And it was like, you know, malaria just happens. You have malaria, and then all of a sudden one day it kind of just beats you down out of
Mhm.
nowhere. And I was like, what if there was a pandemic that, you know, happened suddenly and then left, and you couldn't really prove that you'd had an episode of it, and that, you know, the way at the time we hadn't seen how our country deals with a horrible pandemic, but I just reasoned at the time that there would be a period of time where we didn't know what was happening, why it was happening, how to stop it, you know, who did or did not actually have it, and that there's a lot of leeway in those first couple of weeks to use that to your advantage, and that it would be a way for someone to fight back in a way that they actually couldn't be prosecuted for. And then, because I don't know how to craft a pandemic, I asked on Twitter, and a very nice Canadian epidemiologist named Dr. Brian Haidt, I think that's how we say his last name,Heit. He agreed to answer all my questions. And so for many months, he put up with me on Twitter being like, okay, so we got mosquitoes, we got bed bugs, we got fleas, we got, you know, helping me figure out how it could work.
Right.
I'm like, all right, we've got an RV and I need to be able to solve this. And so he really helped me. And so in the book, it says, like, if I got anything right, it's all on him. If I got anything wrong,
It's all on you. There you go. Well, it, you know, it was, I like the way that we had the little bit of a reveal as it moved on. You know, first off, it was, you know, nobody knew for sure where this was coming from or what to expect, although people who had actually seen it in person, you know, had a little more to go on in terms of what it actually looked like, rather than people who just heard about it or whatever. But it, and I'm sure that, you know, after having experienced a pandemic ourselves, it was, kind of interesting to read this at the point and say, oh, well, at least people didn't do that.
Well, I mean, I was writing the first draft during starting in March of 2020.
Oh my
So
God.
just kind of as it was that first kind of like very unique moment where everybody stayed home and the road outside was silent and there wasn't enough toilet paper and we were having groceries delivered and like we were all, staying home from work and clapping for the doctors. Like that was when I was writing the book. And then I was editing it the next year where we were all like, grizzled, disillusioned, didn't
Right.
trust anything anymore. Nobody was clapping. We didn't know if doctors well, some people thought doctors and science were the enemy for some reason. Yeah, so it was very different writing it from editing it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, to switch over to a few character questions, this one I thought was kind of an interesting one, that in terms of the character names within this book are kind of a combination of the very I guess very generic names that you would, like David, for example.
Yeah, all of the villains and all
very
of my books are named David, which I'm sure you've noticed.
What's that?
All of the villains in all of my books are named David.
I hadn't
I
thought
kill
about
David every book I can.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to warn my husband about that. But anyway, and the anyway, so my question is, in this book, you have like a wide variety. You have things that are kind of the more common names mixed in with ones that are, a bit more creative or unusual. I get, not necessarily unusual, but it led me to wonder, how do you actually decide what to name a character? Do they just pop into your head with a name attached, or do you, how does that work for you?
Well, I have synesthesia. My synesthesia is number and grapheme, which means that letters and numbers have colors and personalities, and I have feelings around them.
Gotcha.
So it has a lot to do with how I feel about a name. I need to use names in general that I don't have someone in my life who's branded with that name. Like if I know a person with this, I would have trouble, writing a, I know Jonathan because I had two friends named Jonathan when I was a child. So Jonathan is taken in my head. There can't be another Jonathan. So when I have a friend named Jonathan, I usually call them by their last name or a nickname. Like there's only one of that name. So I often have to kind of go deep trying to find names. I'll go to the Social Security website where you can put in a year and it'll tell you the top 100, 500 names of that year and just scroll down to something that feels right. I wanted Chelsea. I was trying to write someone very, very different from me. And then I thought that she was the kind of person that between her and her husband, they would give their child the number one most popular name of the year that came out, that they were that kind of people. So those were all pretty basic. I had fun when I got to the VFR and I called in my son who was into wrestling at the time. And I was like, hey, I need to invent a wrestling guy who's like in charge of the WWE, who looks like Triple H and has like the power of a Vince McMahon. And he's like, he's an ex-wrestler, but he's very powerful. And so Rex came up. He's like, oh, you should make his last name Payne, but not like Pain, but like Payne. And we came up with Harlan, and he came up with his wrestler name. I think it was Rampage or Ravage. But yeah, so my son helped come up with Harlan Payne. And everything else is just like, you're just looking for a feeling. Every name has a feeling attached to it, depending on the letter it starts with and the syllables and all that feeling. So you just have to feel around for the right name.
Oh, okay.
The worst is sometimes at the end of a book, I'll have to go back and change the name. Like, you never want to have like 3 characters in the first chapter whose names all begin with a J. You don't want like Jerry, James, Terry, and Jana in the same chapter. So one time I had a Tom and I needed to change Tom. So I was changing it to Jimbo. So when you do that and you don't check the little box for, only special case with all caps, I didn't have an atomic bomb anymore. I had a Jimbostic bomb. Like,
oh God.
You have to be careful with find and replace when you change names that might have smaller words hidden within them.
Ah, okay. Some little tips. So anybody who's listening to this, there we go. Yeah. a slight cautionary tale there, right? Yeah. Now, one of the things I had asked you in our earlier discussion from last year was, did you have a favorite character in the book? And you had responded, that, that you didn't in this one. It would have been it was more difficult for you to pick, whereas in of your more fantasy based works, that it was less difficult. And I thought your response about that was really interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit on that for those who maybe did not see it the earlier?
I mean, I have no recollection of this question. It's like I told you, I don't remember. But
Okay.
this book was kind of about normal people. Like, none of them
Right.
were extraordinary in that they weren't superheroes. They weren't the most beautiful girl. They weren't the princess. They weren't a witch or a vampire. They were just, I was trying to write extremely normal people from the suburbs that I lived in. And then, I guess when River and Leanne show up, you get slightly different people. But it's hard for me to have a favorite among extremely normal people. So it's much easier to be like, oh, I love writing Rhett from Wake of Vultures because, all my life I was told to kind of be quiet and not take up space and not be rude. So writing someone who's just rude off the bat and will punch you if you disrespect them is like super fun for me. Whereas, writing someone like Chelsea, who is like even more, an abused woman who isn't allowed to have thoughts or share them, and who's terrified of being beaten all the time, is like, it's not that much fun. It's valuable and it's cathartic. It's not fun. I did enjoy it. Like, what happened with Patricia, I enjoyed that. Like, that was a really fun challenge for me. I would say
Yes.
I like her.
I think yes. And I want to ask you, I'm going to ask you about some of these, some of the main characters also, but since that was a difficult, the whole, I can't pick a favorite kind of thing, which I totally understand. Which, did you have a favorite secondary character though to write within this
I mean,
book?
Harlan Payne was my favorite. Like, writing that kind of man with that kind of a spot. Like, it's fun to write rock stars. Like the people that have that swagger and confidence, and especially like fighting men that have the physicality to stand behind it. I find those very fun to write.
Oh, and he was a great character too. So this great big bear of a guy who could also be so gentle, and and his backstory was quite sad as well.
Oh, I had to torture people. Like, it's no fun if you're just like, oh, you get off light. No one gets off light.
Was it something I saw from you, or was it I think just in the last couple of days, something about, well, if it's a character you're writing, you can't, you're thinking to yourself, okay, what can I do to you?
Oh yeah, no, if I'm writing them, they have to be tortured and pushed to the brink of humanity and broken. And if I'm watching the TV show, I'm like, no, don't hurt us.
Exactly.
I was like watching the last episode of The Mandalorian through my fingers.
Oh, okay. So you're like, oh no. Now Chelsea is, of course, a fascinating character, as are all, especially the three your three main characters in the story, and we get to see her evolution throughout the book. What, from your perspective, what do you think was the final straw for her? That, I mean, she in some ways didn't have, she didn't have a whole lot of choices at that time, but what was the final straw for her to kind of step outside of herself and have to become this other person almost?
I think when you're caught in this kind of a cycle of an abuse, when you're living with a narcissist who has systematically cut off all of your routes of escape, all of your resources, she had no access to money. She had no access to family that cared about her at all. She'd been cut off from her friends. She wasn't allowed to work. Every day seems hopeless. You wake up, the situation is the same, and you don't see a way out. So I think for her, it wasn't that there was a last straw. I think that there was an open door. She finally saw a route to safety. And that's what gets it, is having that open door instead of the closed door, because it's the cycle of abuse traps you in that it doesn't feel like it's possible to change. You don't wake up and think maybe something different will happen. They do this thing with rats, where they will put them in a tank and make them swim. And the rats that they will put their hand in and save them, once they start to collapse, will swim longer because they believe, well, when I'm about to collapse, someone will save me. The rats that they don't save, that just sink, faster
Mhm.
and faster they give up. And it's like that. If you think that there's
Mm.
help out there, you have some hope to that there might be something better. But if every time you try to change something or make your life better, you get slapped down, it's very hard to get the impetus to do anything about it.
Okay. And you talked about, being trapped in the cycle, and it, that's kind of what happens to Ella. We see her in, especially in what she's going through with her boyfriend, that her supposed boyfriend, that she recognizes this and says, I'm not going to get caught in this cycle, and I'm going to stand up and, not let it get to this point of what I have to witness in my own house most of the time, or, at least all, very often. And so what for you, what were some of the key elements of that character that you really wanted to develop?
I mean, I think so when I was that age and when I could drive like Ella, I had a go bag in my trunk, and I was always waiting for maybe one day he'll do something bad enough that I have no choice but to leave, to where I almost came to crave that because I knew what was going to happen at night, and I knew the pattern of it, and I knew that my mom was never going to do anything about it. So there was just that sense of like maybe someday something will happen and I will have that open door moment where I can make a decisive choice. And it did happen for me. My dad went from choking my mom to hitting her, and that was when I was like, okay, a decisive moment. That's a bruise. I'm leaving now. And I walked out the door. And luckily enough, my mom went with me. So I think that when you're a teenager, you have that sense of, I can't change this. I'm helpless. But you have more of a sense of, but I can leave. Like I have a car,
Right.
I have a job, I have some money. I just have to find that line between I can stand this and I can't stand this. So for her, she didn't get to that moment. She didn't have her open door. She got shoved out of the nest as a baby bird and had to learn how to fly,
Right. Yeah.
because I'm a very mean person.
Well, she ended up doing fine for herself, but yes, and that, that whole chapter where uh, she comes upon Leanne and River at the store, and the whole thing with the van. That's all great. That's just the fact that she was so surprised that am I allowed to be in a place where I feel safe, and there are people being nice to me. She makes that observation several times, like, why are they being nice to me? It was almost as though, you know, it was completely a foreign idea to her. And
No,
uh,
this happened to me. This happened to me when my mom and I left my dad. We went to stay with one of her friends, and we walked into their house at like midnight. And the lady's husband was sitting in a big old lazy boy, and he looked us up and down. And my hair was down to my waist then, and so was my mom had hair down to his waist. And the guy looked at us, and his brows wrinkled down. And he said, well, "There goes the plumbing. How long are you staying?" And like it was just the most like, if somebody's too nice, you just break down. But I just remember in that moment being like, oh, he can't, like, we're gonna be safe here. Like that guy
right.
just made this nice little baby joke. It was. But I remember that moment. I don't remember anything, but I remember that.
Yeah.
I,
Well,
I,
yeah.
I think you need those moments. I think the key Ella moment for me, one of the ones that I had in the outline that made it to the final story, was when she goes to the playground at night, and you have that sense that, like, I think especially once are a parent and have teenagers, and you realize like they're just little kids. Like the media and TikTok may want them twerking in bikinis and doing hard drugs, but in their hearts, if you let them, they're just little kids in big bodies, and they still want to swing and play and jump around. And I just really love the idea that only during a pandemic where half the people are dead can a 17-year-old like swing on a swing without worrying about a mom yelling at her or the HOA calling the police or somebody making fun of her. I just love that moment of, teenagers are still just kids, and we force them, especially kids who grow up in domestic violence. Like, you have to grow up very fast. You often get parentified or neglected, and you have to take care of yourself, and in her case, her little sister.
Yeah. Well, now, and when we discussed Patricia briefly in the last time that we talked about the book, and you had made the comment that, you know, Patricia is coming out of 40 years of damage, and you know that
I mean,
it
like
takes
more
her a
than
minute.
55, but yeah.
Yeah. And well, that's true because it started very young. I mean, for her, it started very young when, you know, when you hear about the things that she had to put up with, you know, from her own mother. But when, so we get to see, which to me was such a fascinating evolution of that character, that, you know, from being the person that we most disliked to being probably the one we liked almost the most. And it wasn't because it was an opposite extreme, maybe, but I did want to mention this because I noted this one, and I thought that it was a great description of the protective instinct, which for her, she's kind of taken over as Brooklyn's mom by this point, because they don't know how are they, you know, how are they going to hook back up with her actual mom. But she says her entire body flooding with a heady mix of love and terror and whatever makes a cat's claws come out. And I thought that's perfect to describe that instinct. And I, I guess my question for you about that character, and you had said before that you really wanted to take someone that was very unlikable and make them the opposite, and you really pulled that off quite well with this character. But what for you, she talks about Patty is not too far below the surface, and now Patty's going to come out. What do you think for Patricia was kind of the last straw to make sure Patty came out, or was it very much a progressive thing after what the way her own husband treated her and so forth?
I think this is a woman who has built herself into a battlement of walls to keep out hurt, because she was hurt from such a young age, and because the situation into which her daughter was born caused her to also put up walls. That, you know, it takes a lot to knock those kind of walls down and to allow yourself to feel vulnerable when you've spent your entire, you know, adulthood trying to make yourself so safe that you can never be vulnerable again. So that's why I stuck her 5-year-old granddaughter with her, because, you know, if anything's going to break you down, it's going to be a little kid in a tutu who just needs love. But I think that the final line for her was at the urgent care.
Yes.
You know, where she had a moment of, you know, she can't pay the bill. And in that moment when she went from, you know, I have enough money and I can survive, to I don't have any money and they can't put me in jail because this kid will die, she has to become Patty again. She has to go back to being that desperate, canny animal. And I think that's a gift of love too, to go back to that. And a gift of sacrifice, because, you know, she knows the consequences of what happens if she can't get out of that situation.
Right. Well, once again, my great kudos to you on that character, because that, as I, you know, and I know I've mentioned this before, but as a grandmother myself, seeing the way that she treated them, and, you know, for no good reason. I mean, other than her, it's not as though there was a real reason for her to behave the way that she did. You know, nothing had happened that caused this, but for her to you know, think about, or, you know, the lack thereof, to take that character and make her somebody that ended up.
Uh-oh. Did I freeze or did you freeze? There we go.
Now, oh yeah, there we both went away for a second. Now, I have a question from one of your readers, Rocky, who's also a longtime fan, or a longtime supporter. Yep, a longtime supporter of the Urban Fantasy Track, and and I've known him for years. And this is his question. He says that some have said the book is too violent. Now I'm guessing he means, I guess he means from like reviews and stuff. But he said he thought that it all worked for the story you were telling. And he said, did your editor ever say, maybe this scene is too much and you need to tone it down? While you were in the midst of writing the book?
No, but I can tell you from my, gosh, I guess second or third book, Servants of the Storm, my YA horror book, I had a scene where somebody killed a dog, and my agent at the time said, you can't kill a dog. And I was like, but the dog turned into a demon. And she was like, but you named it. It has a dog name, so you can't kill it. And I was like, well, I wouldn't know where this is a rule. And she's like, well, it is. You can't kill this dog. So my whole career, I've gone with, okay, you can't kill a dog. And I got to this book, and I was like, that's how serious this is.
Right.
It has a name. It's serious. Like, it's called The Violence, not The Very Nice Day in Tampa.
Right.
So, I try to, in some books I go with, the violence does not have to be justified, and I'll, Red kills whoever he wants in the Wake of Vultures series. It does not apologize. But in this book, I tried to make sure that everything was realistic, violent, earned, that it made sense. And it's a lot of it is, in speculative fiction, you're taking your brain and going, okay, what if these logical things happen in this order, what's the end result? And, if you cat sit for a lot of old people, you're going to find dead animals in their houses when a pandemic breaks out. And so I didn't enjoy that, but it felt like that was what the story needed. And I also think it also brings home like how serious the situation is. If there aren't any kind of stakes of that kind of dark, dirty drill down to the bare bones of what is actually occurring, then it doesn't feel realistic to me. So I think in this book it was warranted by the title and the situation. But yeah, there were some dark moments.
A few, but yeah, as you said, everything.
I don't know. I was in Sam's Club yesterday, and now I remember why I started this book in a warehouse store.
I can't remember the last time I was in one, but I get what you mean. Yeah,
wasn't good.
Now, and Rocky did have a final note that I love the book and thank you for such an amazing story, Delilah.
See, that means a lot. If y'all don't know Rocky reads like 2 books a day.
Yeah,
I'm not like, that's not me hyperbolic at all. Like, he straight up reads 1 to 2 books a day. So if he likes a book, he likes it.
That's right. Now, I guess, and my last question for you is, have you had people, I know this happens to authors, but what I'm curious about is if you've had people reach out to you with their own personal stories in reaction to this book.
So several years ago, may have coincided with writing for Star Wars, I took my personal email off of my website because some people wanted to let me know some things that were not constructive. So now on my website, if you want to send me an email, you have to go through my agent or my publicist, basically. But I make up for that by saying, like, if you want to come on Twitter, like, I will interact with you if it's in good faith and kind. I'll answer any question you have. I'll talk to you. Like, I answer almost all questions there that aren't, trying to cause me pain. So I'm out there for you. Same on Instagram. So I haven't gotten a lot of emails, which is also good. I've learned that I have ADHD and possibly autism, which is why I really hate responding to personal emails. I find them very frightening and threatening.
It's like, oh no, it's going to get me. Yeah.
Well, no, it's just this person wants something from me, and I have to read their signals well enough to answer in a way that they will find satisfying and make them be seen, but without starting an endless chain of letters from them, which I couldn't handle. But people in person, at almost every con I go to, at least 1 or 2 people come see me when I'm signing and are very emotional and tell me, that this rung true for them, especially people who have experienced this kind of violence. You tell people and they don't believe you. No one that I told that my dad strangled me unconscious, no one believed me. He wouldn't do that. I've known him his whole life. He's a good boy from this town. He wouldn't do that. So there's a very specific feeling that you get when you've kind of been gaslit around your own story for a while. So I've been told by people that it rings true for them, and that Chelsea's escape and finding her own way means a lot to them, and that really means a lot to me. Like it would have meant a lot to me to see something like this in a book when I was younger, and to know I wasn't alone. So yeah, I'm right. I hope that it helps people, and I hope that, I mean, there's no guide on how to get out of a bad situation here, but even just recognizing that this is a bad situation and hearing someone say it in prose, I think can help too.
Right,
And
exactly.
there's a moment in this book where Chelsea is like, "Is this abuse? Like, I don't know if this is abuse." And you're reading the book and you're like, "Yes, it's abuse." But from the inside, you're like, "I don't know. It's been this way for 10 years. Surely this is normal."
Right, right. And there is something to that old adage about being on the outside looking in. And when you're reading a book, you're kind of in that role. So that makes perfect sense why people could see it and say, "Oh, this is what I think it is," kind of thing. So, well, I don't want to go before giving you the opportunity to tell people what you have coming. I know you have a few things coming out over the next few months, and could you tell us what we can look forward to coming from you over this year?
Sure. So, The Violence is available now as a hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook, all that. My next book is out on July 4th. It is called Disney Mirrorverse Pure of Heart. It's based on the Disney Mirrorverse mobile game. But it's very fun in that I get to throw together a bunch of Disney characters. So you can see how Stitch interacts with Hades and Sully from Monsters, Inc. You can see what happens when Tiana and Rapunzel and Snow White hang out. You can see what happens when you take Snow White from her, "Oh gosh, the animals in the forest," and you give her an axe and she has to kill stuff. So it was very much fun for me to do that. So that's called Pure of Heart. It's out in July. July 18th is my next Star Wars book. It's called Star Wars Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. And it is about what would make a Jedi become an Inquisitor, which, we saw those in Kenobi. We saw Reva, or the third sister, the fifth brother, the fourth sister, and the Grand Inquisitor. So this is an Inquisitor book. Lots of lightsabers, lots of the Force, lots of dark side. Super fun for me. Violent, not this violent, but violent. And then in September, we have my next YA. It's called Midnight at the Houdini. It is a very sweet YA romance inspired by The Tempest and Sleep No More. The play in New York where you run up and down a 6th-floor hotel that I'm obsessed with. You can see my mask. This is my Sleep No More mask right here. I love it.
Okay. Yeah.
So that is a very unusual book for me in that it's not violent at all. It's just a romantic, fun little book. And then in October comes my next really violent book, which is a horror novella called Bloom. My daughter is 16 years old, and she asked me to write this book for her. So it is a female romance horror book.
Well,
I think that's for sure.
They all sound wonderful, and I'm sure that they will be. I know they will show up at my house, and I got to tell you, I need to get a bigger shelf because I have all your books on one shelf.
Yeah, and you have all of everyone's books. Like, you have every book.
Well, I'm thinking. I've already been thinking ahead. I thought, okay, well, where am I going to put these when they come? I need to give Delilah a longer shelf, or well, the paperbacks are on one shelf, and then anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that's okay. Rearranging the bookshelves is something I have to do occasionally anyway. But those all sound great. Thank you so much. Many thanks to our viewers. We appreciate it. If I will have included some information, anything that you would like me to add, Delilah, I'll put in the notes so that like your website and stuff like that. We can do that if people want to. For those who don't know already, they can do that.
I'm super easy. I'm Delilah S. Dawson everywhere. DelilahSDawson.com, Delilah S. Dawson on Twitter, Delilah S. Dawson on Instagram.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks. That's the way to find her. And for my part here at the Urban Fantasy Track YouTube channel, sometime in June, I will have part of our author interview series, an interview with Charlene Harris, and I'm looking forward to that as well. So
I love her.
She's amazing. I do too. And but Delilah, thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule. And I appreciate it so much. And many thanks to all of our people who have watched this.
Yep. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Carol.
Oh, you're welcome.